You weren't meant to see this. While most of the world was fixated on Ripple's court battle with the SEC, while XRP holders argued over charts, price targets, and settlement dates, something far more important was happening behind the curtain. Ripple wasn't just fighting for clarity. They were building something, quietly, systematically, globally, because the truth is, the courtroom was never the battlefield. It was the distraction. The real war has always been about infrastructure. And now the blueprint is leaking. A silent framework designed not to disrupt the system, but to become it. Not to challenge the banks, but to replace the rails they run on. And at the heart of it all, not RippleNet, not partnerships, XRP. As in a native liquidity layer for a $1 trillion financial engine that runs silently beneath CBDCs, tokenized assets, and cross-border trade. You were told it was about remittances. You were told it was about faster payments. But what Ripple's actually building is a backdoor into global liquidity control. One that connects governments, banks, and institutions to an XRP-powered framework that moves value at the speed of the internet. And here's what most holders still don't realize. Ripple doesn't need XRP to explode overnight. They just need the system to keep installing one corridor at a time. Because once the infrastructure is embedded, XRP doesn't have to compete. It becomes necessary. And when that moment arrives, when the corridors go live and institutions flip the switch, it won't be about price speculation. It'll be about control. Ripple's $1 trillion plan just slipped into view, and the backdoor they've been building for a decade is wide open. For over a decade, Ripple positioned itself as the polite guest in the banking world. The blockchain company that wasn't trying to overthrow the system, but improve it. A helper, an innovator, an ally to financial institutions. They wore the suit, spoke the language, showed up at the right meetings, shook the right hands, and on the surface it worked. RippleNet rolled out as a faster, cheaper cross-border payments network. Banks began testing on-demand liquidity, ODL. Small corridors lit up, Philippines, Mexico, Brazil. And for most, that's where the story ended. A fintech startup using a digital asset to help banks move money faster. But that's not the real story. That's the surface narrative. The truth? Ripple never came through the front door to revolutionize finance. They built a backdoor, a Trojan horse disguised as a utility tool. You see, Ripple didn't pitch XRP as a moonshot investment or a decentralized currency for the people. They pitched it as infrastructure, not something to replace money, but something to move it, silently, instantly, globally. Ripple knew something most of the crypto industry ignored. If you want to change the financial system, don't fight it. Build the rails beneath it and offer a better one. And that's what they did. They embedded themselves into the legacy financial system, not to disrupt it, to replace its outdated plumbing. Here's how they did it. They didn't scream decentralization. They whispered compliance. They didn't chase NFTs or DAOs. They chased liquidity corridors and regulatory sandboxes. They didn't create hype. They created architecture. And slowly, Ripple started gaining access to the very core of financial power. Central banks, trade finance platforms, IMF working groups, BIS innovation hubs, digital currency policy councils, all while building tools like RippleNet, XRPL, and ODL not just for banks to test, but for institutions to quietly integrate. And most of the crypto market missed it because Ripple didn't make noise. They made inroads. But why a backdoor? Because taking control of global liquidity from the outside would never work. Too much regulation, too much resistance, too much inertia. So Ripple took a different route. They didn't knock. They didn't wait to be let in. They built the tools that institutions couldn't resist using because they solved a $27 trillion problem. Trapped capital. Legacy finance requires pre-funded accounts all around the world just to settle trades and payments. Ripple offered a way to eliminate those accounts and replace them with a neutral digital asset that settled in seconds. That asset? XRP. And the longer they worked with regulators, tested with banks, and built private corridors, the more the entire system began shifting in their direction. This wasn't a company trying to launch a coin. This was a company using a coin to quietly reprogram the base layer of international liquidity. And now, for the first time, the backdoor is wide enough for anyone paying attention to see it. The question is, what happens when the system flips the switch? And XRP isn't optional anymore. If you still think Ripple's endgame is helping banks move remittances faster, you've missed the real play, because Ripple's not trying to speed up payments. They're trying to own the bloodstream of global liquidity. And while retail investors debated SEC lawsuits and XRP price predictions, Ripple was building a global liquidity grid behind the scenes, corridor by corridor, policy by policy, integration by integration. Why liquidity is the endgame. Every financial transaction, from a remittance in Kenya to a bond sale in London, requires liquidity. It's not just about sending money. It's about having the right asset in the right place at the right time. That's why banks pre-fund accounts in dozens of countries, tying up trillions in capital, just so trades can settle. This is inefficient, expensive, outdated. Ripple knew this was the flaw in the system, and they built XRP to fix it. A neutral, programmable, borderless liquidity layer that could bridge any two currencies in seconds. And they didn't just theorize it. They started installing it, quietly building the grid. Ripple began with smaller markets: Philippines, Mexico, Brazil, Nigeria. These weren't just test cases. They were strategic corridor entries. High remittance volume, low competition, weak infrastructure, perfect for proving that XRP-based liquidity could outcompete the legacy system. And it worked. Banks and money transmitters began onboarding. ODL volume surged. Settlement costs dropped. And behind the curtain, Ripple scaled the same model toward larger institutions. That's when the game changed. Because while retail still focused on price, Ripple was meeting with the European Central Bank, the Digital Pound Foundation, the Saudi Central Bank, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the IMF and the World Bank. They weren't just offering partnerships. They were offering infrastructure, ready to plug into CBDCs, stablecoins, and cross-border digital trade. The XRP layer, they don't want you to notice. The Ripple Liquidity Hub isn't just a product. It's a blueprint. It enables financial institutions to access digital asset liquidity on demand with XRP at the center. No more locked capital. No more complex correspondent banking layers. Just one asset, one bridge, instant access to global value. And the brilliance? It doesn't need XRP to function. It just needs integration. Because once the system is running on XRP in the background, once it's settled into corridors, CBDC pilots, and trade finance rails, it won't be removed. It becomes systemic, invisible, inevitable. Why this isn't just another blockchain play. Ripple isn't competing with Ethereum or Solana. They're not chasing NFTs or DeFi yield. They're focused on the plumbing, the rails, the boring back-end no one notices until everything runs on it. And if they succeed, they won't just be a blockchain company. They'll be the central liquidity counterparty to the global economy. Every corridor, every CBDC, every trade flow, relying on XRP to move value. And the best part? Most of the world will never realize it's happening until the system is already running. There's a moment in every technological shift when it stops asking for permission and simply becomes the default. You didn't vote for the internet to take over the world. It just happened. Email replaced letters. Streaming replaced cable. Websites replaced directories. And now, XRP is quietly moving into position to replace liquidity rails. Globally. Not with hype, not with noise, but with utility that institutions can't refuse. Because what Ripple has been building isn't a financial app. It's financial infrastructure. And once infrastructure is installed, it doesn't get uninstalled. How the flip happens. Here's how the flip works. The moment XRP stops being a crypto and becomes the foundation. Corridor saturation. Ripple's strategy has always been bottom-up. Start with high-friction corridors. Prove real-world efficiency. Let data speak. Then expand into more regulated regions. As more corridors go live, XRP stops being an experiment and becomes an industry standard. Liquidity depth becomes self-sustaining. As more banks, remittance companies, and platforms tap into ODL, XRP's liquidity becomes self-reinforcing. It no longer needs speculative demand. The usage itself sustains the market. Central bank integration. Ripple is already working with several central banks on CBDC infrastructure. If even one of them chooses XRP as a neutral bridge asset, it will trigger a domino effect because no central bank wants to be last to modernize. The invisible switch. Eventually, institutions will settle trades, convert currencies, and move value across borders without even knowing XRP is involved. Just like the average person doesn't understand TCP/IP when browsing the web, XRP becomes a background standard. When the system starts needing XRP, at that point, XRP doesn't moon because of hype. It rises because the system needs it to function. Trade platforms rely on it for instant settlements. CBDCs rely on it for bridging cross-border value. Banks rely on it to free trapped capital. Institutions rely on it to avoid FX delays, fees, and volatility. It becomes not a bet, but a requirement. And in that moment, XRP holders will realize something profound. They weren't holding a coin. They were holding access to the global financial mainframe. This is when speculation dies and real value begins. Most of the crypto space is still in the casino betting on charts, cycles, influencers. But Ripple is building something post-speculation. Something that doesn't care if the market is bullish or bearish. Something that functions in silence until one day everything runs on it. And when that day comes, XRP will no longer be a choice. It will be a component. Installed. Mandatory. Essential. So while others are watching TikToks about dog coins, Ripple is preparing to flip the global liquidity switch. And XRP is not waiting to win the race. It's quietly preparing to run the whole track. The most powerful technologies don't arrive with fanfare. They blend in, silently upgrading the world while no one's paying attention. Electricity didn't start with a global rollout. It began in backrooms and factories, invisible until it was everywhere. The internet didn't ask permission. It slipped into servers, browsers, routers, until it was no longer new. And that's exactly how this will unfold. XRP won't take over with headlines. It will take over with integrations. The takeover won't be televised. There won't be a breaking news story saying, XRP is now the foundation of global finance. No, it will happen functionally, not visibly. You'll make an international payment, and it'll settle in seconds. You'll receive your digital paycheck, and it'll be tokenized. You'll pay for goods abroad, and currency will convert instantly, invisibly. And underneath it all, XRP will be running in the background, not as a speculative coin, not as a talking point, but as the infrastructure the world didn't even realize it adopted. Most people will miss it. Why? Because they're still looking for headlines. They're watching charts, waiting for lawsuits to end, obsessed with when the bull market will come back. But by the time it does, it won't look the same. The real gains won't come from hype. They'll come from owning the protocols that were already plugged in before the flip. That's the mistake retail always makes. They look for events. The smart money watches for infrastructure. Ripple's masterstroke was patience. While other crypto projects fought for TV time and hype cycles, Ripple kept building in silence. Partnerships with central banks. Integrations with payment giants. Infrastructure for cross-border FX. On-ramps for institutional liquidity. They weren't trying to convince retail to buy. They were convincing the system to adopt. And now, piece by piece, that system is going live. By the time you notice, it's already too late. The moment XRP becomes essential, not just useful, it's over. Over for speculation. Over for denial. Over for doubt. Because from that point on, you're no longer buying an asset. You're buying access. Access to the most valuable financial rail of the digital age. And most won't realize it until they're already using it. without ever knowing it. The window is closing. This isn't a future theory. It's an active transition. Right now, while the world is distracted, Ripple is finishing the install. And once that's complete, XRP will no longer be an investment opportunity. It will be a requirement. They told you it was just a lawsuit, just a remittance app, just another altcoin trying to stay relevant. But now you know the truth. Ripple wasn't trying to win a crypto war. They were bypassing it entirely. While the market chased volatility, Ripple chased infrastructure. While influencers shouted price predictions, Ripple walked into the offices of central banks. While retail waited for the flip, Ripple was flipping the switch, corridor by corridor, line by line of code. And the most shocking part? You were never meant to see it. This was never about hype. It was about architecture. Not about moonshots. About monetary rewiring. One day soon, you'll transact across borders, and it will settle in seconds. You'll get paid in digital currencies, and not even think about it. You'll open your banking app, and everything will feel faster, smoother, seamless. But beneath it, XRP will be doing the heavy lifting. Not as a feature, not as a product, but as the invisible rail powering the system. And by that time, it won't matter if you understood the charts. It won't matter if you held for 3 years or 3 minutes. It will only matter if you saw the backdoor being installed, before it became the front gate. This is your window, the moment before the flip, before XRP stops being an asset in your portfolio, and becomes a piece of infrastructure the world quietly depends on. Because here's what Ripple knew all along. The most powerful financial takeover wouldn't happen with noise. It would happen in silence. And by the time the world noticed, it would already be running on XRP. The plan is live. The switch is near. And the question is no longer if. It's whether you'll be watching the future run on XRP, or already inside it.